Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my top 10 favorite thriller slash horror slash mystery books. So I did this video a couple years ago, and since doing this video before, I've read a lot of new thriller and horror books, and so my list, my top 10 list, has changed quite a bit. And what I'm going to do is make sure to mention anything that was previously in the list that no longer is in the list as an honorable mention so that you know how my list has changed. Before we get into the books today, I want to quickly thank this video's sponsor, Skillshare. I was so excited when I got the opportunity to work with Skillshare because if you didn't know, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes where you can go to get inspired, learn new skills, and put them to work in impactful ways. I've actually used Skillshare in the past when I was into my creative writing, and I absolutely loved the volume of videos that they had and the wide breadth of videos that they had available for learning any kind of new skill. It is the largest online learning community for creatives. They have a world-class community that connects teachers with members, and they have a learn by doing approach to teaching. The types of classes that you can find on Skillshare include everything from illustration, graphic design, photography, UX design, entrepreneurship, creative writing, fine arts, social media. It's truly incredible all the different types of learning that you can find on their platform. And of course, if you're looking to maybe start up a new side hustle or get into more freelance work, they also have great career-focused classes for that as well. The classes that I took a lot of interest in, of course, surrounded my booktube channel, and they have a bunch of different classes for people who are looking to start out with a new YouTube channel or potentially even grow their existing channel. So the class that I am very, very interested in is Romanticizing Your Life, a beginner's guide to creating vlogs for YouTube. That's something that I've been trying to do more of for my own channel, is vlog work, and it's something where it doesn't come naturally to me to know how to create these vlogs that look really good and appealing to you all as the audience. So Carrie is actually on YouTube, and I love her channel, and she has a class all about this, which I love. You also can find a bunch of different YouTube specific classes like YouTube Success, Expert Tips for Growing Your Channel in 2023, YouTube Success Blueprints, Mastering the Art of Channel Growth, all sorts of classes. So I love it for that. I also love productivity classes. So anything around productivity is something that I'm also very interested in taking. Skillshare did send me a great offer for you all. The first 500 people to use my link will get access to one of Skillshare's best offers, 30 days free and 40% off of your first year of Skillshare membership. So definitely check them out using the link and the code down below. And thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to talking about the books. So starting with all of the honorable mentions and the books that were on the list previously that no longer are. The first one being The Shining by Stephen King. Now, this previously was my favorite Stephen King that I had read, but I have since read a Stephen King that I actually enjoy more than The Shining, so you'll get to see in my new top 10 list what that one is. But I still love The Shining. I think it's fantastic, and I just love a good haunted house. And I love the character work so much in this one. So it definitely still deserves to be an honorable mention, but there is a new Stephen King that has taken its place. The next one that I have as an honorable mention is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson and the entire Millennium Trilogy. Now, this is one that was on my list previously because the trilogy as a whole is fantastic, especially the third book. The third book is actually my favorite in that trilogy, but looking back, there are a couple of moments in this trilogy that were slower, were a little bit more tedious to get through. The second book in particular was not my favorite, so looking back, I can say that the trilogy as a whole is probably not my favorite of all time, but it is still a fantastic trilogy that I highly recommend. Another one I have as an honorable mention is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. So for this one, I have just since read so many amazing books that this one kind of got knocked off the list, but I still love Simone St. James and her kind of signature brand of paranormal thrillers that she does. I love the way she plays with timelines in the past and in the current day, and how those timelines kind of weave together throughout the story. I just love her books so much. But this one wasn't a 5-star, it was a 4.5 because of some of the parts of the ending not being my absolute favorite, so it did just get knocked down, but I still love Simone St. James. All right, another honorable mention. Oh my goodness, I have a ton of honorable mentions because my list has changed quite a bit, so still not to the top 10 quite yet, but another one I have is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I still love this book. I still think my original description of kind of comparing this to Fried Green Tomatoes meets Dracula is accurate. It's a ton of fun. I love Grady Hendrix' humor and his style of horror I just adore, and his character work is amazing. And I loved the themes explored in this book. I loved the scary moments that were so scary at times. So this one is still fantastic. It's just I've read a Grady Hendrix that I love even more. All right, I have 2 more honorable mentions. So then we'll get to the top 10. My goodness, the next honorable mention I have is The Dry by Jane Harper. What Jane Harper does so well, and what makes her books stand out for me from other thriller mystery books, is her setting and atmosphere is so vivid. The way she writes the setting of the book and the Australian outback it feels like you're there with the characters. It's so beautifully written. And I love her style of kind of detective mysteries. And this one does start out quite gruesome, and I did not figure out the twist at the end. It's a kind of a classic whodunit, but told in a more thriller of a tone. So I really, really like The Dry. I think this is still my favorite Jane Harper that I've read. Last honorable mention I have is Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. Now this is one that was on my top 10 previously and was very, very hard to take off because I could not put this book down. It's a thriller book, but you kind of know what's going on. There's no sort of big twists or reveals throughout this book, but what it does so well is it keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire book. I was hooked from page 1 and I could not put this book down. So if you're looking for a big twist or crazy reveals, this is not the book for you, but if you just want to be on the edge of your seat, just wondering how in the world this character is going to get out of these certain situations that she's in, this is such a good one for that. Now let's finally get to the top 10. So let's start with the books that were on the list before, and I'll kind of just quickly run through those, and then we'll get to the books that are new to this list. The Last Mrs Parish by Liv Constantine. Now this one and Behind Closed Doors, I kind of kept going back and forth on which one was going to make the top 10 and which one wasn't. And the reason I chose this one to make the top 10 was because I'll never forget the first time I read this book. And something happens in this book kind of halfway through, and I remember my jaw was on the floor. I couldn't believe what had just happened and where the book ended up going, and it was so much fun. I was so genuinely shocked. So for that reason, just that first reading experience I had with this one, I could not take it off of my top 10. It was so good. So if you love a good domestic thriller, this is a fantastic one. Now, it does have some very unlikable characters, so you're not going to necessarily love any of the characters or really root for any of the characters, but I just love a good, juicy domestic thriller. I really do, and this one is so juicy. So I love The Last Mrs Parish. I will always, always love my first experience reading this book. The next one that was on the list previously is The Whisper Man by Alex North. Now, I love this book because I love a good parent-child relationship in a thriller or a horror book. That's like one of my favorite things to explore is a parent-child relationship, and this one has such a good father and son relationship that I was so invested in, and I love the tropes in this book. The imaginary friend that the child sees that you don't know if it's real or if it's fake. The working with a serial killer to catch another serial killer. The copycat serial killer that you don't know if he's back or if it's a copycat. It's so good. It's so good. I loved this book so much, and the character work and the spooky, creepy elements were just done so well. So I will always love The Whisper Man. It truly is amazing. And I need to read more Alex North. It is a shame I haven't read more Alex North. The second book he's written, The Shadows, is on my TBR for this month. So I definitely want to read more from him because this one was so spectacular. I loved it. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I, again, kind of like The Last Mrs Parish, I will just never forget my first time reading Gone Girl. And the twists and turns in this book, the character work and some of the character monologues just are so epic and are so memorable. I love the character work so much in this book, and I just love what it set up for thrillers to come. It's one of my absolute favorites, and it's one of the first of its kind in this particular genre, so it's just so good. It's so good. And yeah, if you haven't been spoiled for what's in this book, I think you're gonna love it. I really do. And the adaptation's great, but the book is so good. I don't want to say too much because I want you to go in not knowing too much about it and just enjoying your first time experience with it. Last one that was on the list before, and then we'll get to all new books. You all knew it was coming. Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This is always going to be on my top 10 list. It's never going to drop off because it's my favorite book of all time. I think that this book can be very polarizing. It's very long, and you're essentially following a character, a little boy who goes missing in the woods for several days. And when he returns, when he's found, he's different in certain ways, and he is determined to build this tree house in the middle of the forest, because if he doesn't, there is a voice telling him that everything he knows will be changed forever. And it's very much a horror. There are some pretty disgusting things, disgusting visuals in this book and imagery in this book, but I, again, kind of like The Whisper Man, I love the mother and son relationship in this book so much, and it made me so emotional, and I just loved the twists and turns. I loved the build-up. I could not stop reading this book. It made me cheer, it made me cry. It was just so beautifully done. So I will always love this book. It will always hold a special place in my heart because of the characters that we follow. And yeah, I can see why it's polarizing, but I personally, it just worked so well for me. So I love Imaginary Friend. All right, now let's talk about all the new books on this list. So let's start with a couple of the authors that I had mentioned before having new books on this list. The first being Grady Hendrix. So the Grady Hendrix that I read that took the spot from Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires was My Best Friend's Exorcism. I don't know how Grady Hendrix knows how to write such an accurate teenage girl. You're following two best friends. One of them gets possessed and the other is determined to save her friend, hence the title of the book. And I just could not believe how in the beginning, when you're following this friendship developing, it felt like I was reading about me and my own friends as kids and our friendship. It felt so accurate, and it made me immediately invested in these characters. I love these characters so much. I love all of the fun 80s pop culture references in this book. It's got this kind of, it's horrific what's happening, but it's kind of got this lighthearted tone to it. It's got this humorous tone to it, and I just adore it so much, so much. Oh my goodness. Grady Hendrix, I don't know how you know so accurately what it's like to be a teenage girl, but you write it beautifully. The next one I have is Carrie by Stephen King. So The Shining was my favorite until I read Carrie. And I think this is kind of an unpopular opinion because I've seen a lot of people not love Carrie. And for me, what I loved so much about Carrie was Carrie herself. I felt so invested in Carrie's story. I loved her, and I felt so horrible for the things that she had to go through. I mean, this is a very dark book, and I feel like everyone kind of knows what this is about. Carrie is an outcast girl in high school, and she has these kind of underlying powers that she's afraid to explore because of her very, very strict household that she lives in. She has a very hard situation at home with her mother, and she gets bullied in high school, and that leads to certain things. Now, this book was something very different than what I was expecting, the way it's told, because it's told through almost like interviews with people who were at the big event that happens in Carrie, and it was kind of told in a reflection style where you're having characters reflect on what happened previously. And I loved the way it unfolded. I listened to the audiobook for it, which was narrated by Sissy Spacek, who played Carrie in the original adaptation. It was beautifully done. And that's what made me connect to it so much over a lot of other Stephen King books, is how much I cared about Carrie and what happened to her, and how invested I felt in her story. So I love Carrie. I thought it was beautifully done, and that's my favorite Stephen King so far. Since we just talked about Stephen King, let's talk about Joe Hill. And I have Nosferatu on my list. I read this a couple years ago in December around Christmas time, which I'm so glad I did, and I listened to the audiobook for this one. And Nosferatu, you are following a character named Charlie Manx and another character named Victoria McQueen. And Charlie Manx is a character who kidnaps children and takes them to a place he calls Christmas Town. And Victoria McQueen is a person who has an encounter with Charlie Manx as a young woman, and as she grows up and has her own children, they cross paths again. And Nosferatu, what I loved so much about this book was, one, I love the scary visuals in this book. I love creepy children. I don't know why. And the creepy kids and the Christmas Town kind of aesthetic in this book just worked so well for me. So I loved the creepy elements of this one, but I also love Charlie Manx. He is an amazing villain, and he really is one of the main characters, which I loved, because sometimes the villain very much takes a backseat and you're only following the protagonist. But because we got so much from Charlie Manx's perspective in this book, oh my gosh, I loved him. He's such a good villain. So I love this book. It totally stood out to me because of the villain that we're following. I mean, the protagonist, Vic, is great too, but Charlie Manx, oh my gosh, he is such a good villain. You just love to hate him. So I love this book, and the audiobook for it, I really think enhances the experience, because the narrator does amazing voices for Charlie Manx and for all of the creepy things that happen in this book. It's such a good audiobook. So if you're going to read this and you have access to the audiobook, I highly recommend going that route, because I really do think it enhanced my experience. The next one I have is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I'd previously read No Exit by this author, and I really enjoyed it, but there were certain things that I just didn't love about the ending. So when I picked up The Last Word, I was very excited to check out something else from this author, because he wrote in a way that was so gripping and fast-paced, and I couldn't put No Exit down. The Last Word, very similar, where I was hooked from page 1 and I could not stop reading this book until I had finished it. The Last Word is following a character who reads a book that she does not like, and she puts a 1-star review of it online, and the author sees this 1-star review and basically comes after her for it. Almost like a reverse Misery by Stephen King. So you have the author, who's kind of unhinged, going after the reviewer. And it was so bonkers. It was a thrill ride from start to finish. The crazy things that happen in this book, there are not insane reveals. You're kind of clued in the whole time as to what's going on in the story, so there aren't these big twists and turns, but you just feel like you are on a thrill ride, and you cannot get off that thrill ride until you finish this book. I don't know how Taylor Adams does it, but he just wrote the most bonkers book, and I loved every second of it. It almost felt so bonkers that it was campy, and it was campy in the best way possible. I loved this book. so good. So, and if you love a good protagonist, like a good, strong, smart protagonist, one of my favorites. Absolutely loved her. So highly recommend The Last Word. It's so good. The next book I have is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is one that I loved because it's thriller, but it has horror-like elements where you're following a family who claims that they lived in a haunted house, and they've since moved away from that haunted house, but they wrote a whole book based on their experience in this house. And so you're following a character, you're following the daughter of that family, kind of try to remember what happened in this house and figure out what was real, what wasn't, but you're also getting to read chapters from the book that this family wrote. So you are getting all of the creepy haunted house fun along with a thriller narrative, figuring out what's real about this house. So much fun, so much fun. I loved this book. I love a good haunted house, and this, I think, is probably my favorite haunted house story so far. And again, I loved the character, the main character that we're following. She was fantastic. It's got the paranormal horror elements, but it's got the fun, fast-paced, action-packed thriller to go along with it. It's just so good. It's so good. And then the last book that I have on my top 10 is The Maid by Nita Prose. Now this is one that was hard to figure out whether to include or not because all the rest of these books are very clearly thriller or horror books. And this is kind of the only one that's not really a thriller. It's definitely not horror. It's more of a cozy mystery. So I wasn't sure whether to include it or not, but it does technically fall into the mystery thriller genre, so I put it here. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. So The Maid follows a character who is neurodivergent, and she's working as a maid in a very upscale hotel, and she comes upon a dead body, and she basically gets framed for this murder. So in order to get herself out of it, she has to work with other characters to figure out what really happened and who really committed this murder, to get herself out of being implicated. And what I loved so much is this book, I would not say it concentrated a lot on the murder mystery. If you want a great murder mystery, I don't think that you're gonna get what you're looking for from The Maid, but I loved the main character of Molly the Maid so much. She is one of my favorite main characters of all time. I loved her. I loved following her. It made me so emotional what she was going through, and her relationship with her grandmother I loved so much. This book made me bawl, it made me smile, it made me happy. It was beautiful. Beautiful. So the character work for me is what made this book stand out so much and makes it one of my all-time favorites. But again, I don't necessarily think that the murder mystery plot is like the strongest in the genre. So don't go into this book thinking you're going to get the best murder mystery of all time. You're not. I think if you go into this book expecting an amazing character story about this maid, you might absolutely love it, like I did. So Molly the Maid, one of my favorites. I just adore this book so much. So that is my top 10 thriller, horror, mystery books. So what is your favorite thriller or horror book? Leave those comments down below. I can't wait to see what your favorites are. And what did you think of this list? Let me know. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye. Thank you.